Tanner Tech. Hello, this is Tanner Tech, and today is part 2 of my tube record player restoration series. So in this video today, I will show you how to properly recap the whole tube chassis, and then test to see if the record player works. So let's get started. The first thing you need to know is what tools and materials you'll need. So obviously, you will need the tube chassis. You will also need a few other tools, such as wire clippers and wire strippers. You'll also need some extra lengths of wire. You'll need your soldering gun. And you'll need your schematic, which will tell you what capacitors you need to replace and what you replace them with. And you'll also need your different capacitors. These ones were harvested from old power supplies and other electronic devices. I have my 2 film capacitors and then my 2 electrolytic capacitors. Now make sure when you get your replacement capacitors that they're the right voltage and capacitance ratings that these capacitors say on them. So the first capacitor I'm going to replace is this one in the front, this giant capacitor. This one's electrolytic and it has 50 microfarads on the red wire, between the red wire and the black wire, and 30 microfarads between the green wire and the black wire. So I'm just going to carefully cut each wire. And then set the old capacitor aside. Now this is electrolytic, so I will be replacing it with these 2 capacitors. One of them is a 47 microfarad capacitor. Now this matches just enough with 50 microfarads. And this one is a 33 microfarad capacitor. This one will match up with a 30 microfarad. So now what I'll do is I'll strip these 3 wires on here and solder them to the capacitors in the way they go. So now that I have these wires stripped, I can tin them with solder. So I'll attach the wires to the capacitor. Now the 2 black wires I'm going to put in parallel. So I'll attach the black wire to one pin of the capacitor, the negative one. And then I'll attach it to the other negative pin of the other electrolytic capacitor. There. The negative wires are soldered. Now I can solder the red and the green wire. Now after the electrolytics are all soldered in place, now it's time to replace the other capacitors. So to do that, we'll cut them just about right next to the capacitor. We'll cut the wires on here with the wire cutters. And we'll cut the wires at the bottom, which are down here. If I can get to it. And we can remove this capacitor. And this one's probably bad too. So as you can see, this capacitor is a 0.47 microfarad capacitor. So I'll be replacing it with this 0.68 microfarad capacitor. The difference shouldn't harm it at all. So to do that, we're going to have to solder this. And we're going to have to add some extra wires because this capacitor isn't as long as this capacitor. So I'll have to add some extender wires. And so after I have this cap soldered to the terminal of a vacuum tube socket, I can put some more solder on this soldering iron and kind of coat this wire with some solder and then solder it directly to the cap and wait until it's secure, and then that cap is changed. Now all we have left to do is this bottom cap, and I'll cut that off and come back when I'm done. So after I have this capacitor taken out, I can activate my soldering iron again, and then I'll very carefully insert the capacitor. And so I have all the capacitors in place, and I have all 3 capacitors, or 4 actually, that were in here before. They're all replaced with new modern capacitors. And so the last thing I'm going to do before this thing is completely recapped is I'm going to take these capacitors and I'm going to hot glue them down to the chassis so they don't touch anything. And so now after I have the 2 electrolytics securely fastened inside the little cage that held the original electrolytic capacitor, now it's time to hook it up to the turntable and give it some power and see if it works. So let's get started. Okay, so now I have all the tube chassis is recapped, and I have it plugged in. So now it's ready to see if the capacitors really did fix it. So let's turn it on. Oh, we're getting some hum on the speakers. It's not nearly as bad as it was, though. Okay, so I have the record player working and spinning, and there seems to be something wrong with it. I can hear a slight 60 Hz hum on the speaker, which is a lot better than the last one I heard. But my problem is I'm still not getting anything on the speaker, which is telling me that somewhere inside here, I'm thinking it's the needle, is not working properly. So I'll feed an external power source into the wires that would go to the needle and see if that fixes anything. So I'll come back after I've done that. So, to test out my theory that the needle is the issue with this and not the actual amplifier, I have removed the needle and taken out the wires. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect two alligator clip wires to this, to these two outputs, where these two outputs would go to the tube amplifier from the needle. But since I've taken out the needle, I'm going to reroute these two outputs to going to my tape deck, so that way I can see if the amplifier is actually working. Okay, so after connecting the needle output wires to my tape deck, I'll fire it up. Let's see what happens. So as you can hear, when I adjust the tuning dial on my radio, you can hear that the music from my tape deck is being accurately amplified by the amplifier, which definitely tells me that the problem with this record player is in fact the needle. And so I'm going to be building a new needle. And so now that I have showed you how to properly recap this tube amplifier, we now know that because of that previous test, that the selenium rectifier still works, so there's no need to replace that with a silicon diode. And so, what I'm going to do for now is I'm going to start working on a new needle for this, using a small piezo element, and in my next video, I'll be showing you how to make that needle. So that is the end of part 2 of my tube record player restoration series. So tune in next time for the how to make a needle. And then we'll be doing a few more episodes after that, such as cleaning up this record player and making the turntable work properly. So, thanks for watching and please subscribe.